Good evening, travelers. This is Mr.DARKVEIL. Somewhere tonight, a tired driver will pull off the highway, shut off the engine, close their eyes, and never drive away. Those quiet rest stops between the cities are built to feel safe. But ask anyone who drives for a living, and their voice drops. Some of these places aren't empty. Some of them are waiting. Tonight, 10 true accounts from people who stopped at the wrong one. A trucker called by a name no stranger should know. A man who heard the ocean call him by his. Subscribe and ring the bell. Stay to the end, because the 10th story hasn't finished happening yet. Now lock your doors, and don't turn around just yet. The first thing that went wrong was the radio. Not static, silence. 1 second I had a Spokane country station fading in and out, and the next the cab was so quiet I could hear my own pulse ticking in my ears. I'd been hauling timber on I-90 for 22 years. Mostly the long northern run between Billings and Coeur d'Alene, and I knew that stretch of road like the lines on my own hands. I could tell you which mile markers had bad shoulders and which gas stations watered down their diesel. So when the radio died right as I pulled into the rest area outside Belvedere, I didn't think much of it. Electrical gremlins, old truck. I parked at the far end of the lot, away from the 2 other rigs whose drivers were already sleeping, killed the engine, and reached for my thermos. That's when I noticed the snow. It had stopped falling, and the lot was lit silver white under the sodium lamps, smooth as a fresh bedsheet, untouched, except for one line of tracks coming out of the black tree line to the east, crossing the open lot, and ending at the front of my truck. I told myself a man had walked over, some other driver stretching his legs, but the spacing was wrong. The strides were too long, 6-7 feet between each print. And the prints themselves weren't boots. They were narrow, and they curled at the front, like the foot had gripped the ground the way a hand grips a railing. And there were only tracks coming toward me, none going back. I sat there with the thermos cooling in my hand and did the math a man does when he doesn't want to believe what he's looking at. I counted the prints twice. I looked at the other 2 trucks and thought about walking over, knocking on a door. But the lot suddenly seemed very wide and very bright, and the idea of stepping out into all that open light made something in my gut clench up. And while I was sitting there, the truck rocked. Gently. Once. The way it does when something heavy leans against the side. I have hit deer at 70 miles an hour. I have driven through hail that dented the hood like a golf ball, and slept through tornado warnings in a Walmart parking lot. I do not spook easy. But the sound that came next put a cold straight down through me, because it wasn't a growl. And it wasn't a voice. It was breathing. Slow, wet, deliberate breathing, right against the driver's door, down low, near the bottom of the window, lower than a standing man's head could reach unless he was crouched on all fours. I didn't move. I had read enough late at night to know that when you don't understand a thing, the worst move is to let it know you're afraid. So I sat with both hands flat on my thighs, and it breathed. And in the side mirror, that little convex one bolted to the door, I watched the glass cloud over from the warmth of it, fogging and clearing in a slow rhythm. In, out, in. At some point during all that I remembered the CB. My hand crept toward it, slow as I could make it, and I keyed the mic and whispered for anyone on the channel. Nothing came back but a hiss, and the second I let go of the button, the breathing outside changed, quickened, the way yours does when you hear a noise in your own house at night. Like it had heard me too. I put the mic down very, very gently, and I did not touch it again. I want to be honest about how long that went on, because it's the part nobody believes. It was minutes, not seconds. Long enough that my legs started to cramp from holding still. Long enough that I began to hope, in a crazy way, that if I just waited it out, it would lose interest and wander back to the trees. The clock on my dash read 2:11 when it started. It read 2:26 when it spoke, because then it sniffed. A long, searching inhale, like a dog working out a scent off the wind, and I swear on everything I have, the breathing stopped for exactly as long as it takes a person to make a decision, and then it spoke. It didn't have a mouth made for it. The words came out wrong, stretched. The consonants slurred like a tape played at the wrong speed. But they were words, in plain English, in a voice that was trying very hard to sound like a tired man, and not quite managing. "You smell like the river," it said. I don't know what that means. I have turned it over every night since, and I do not know. I grew up in 2. An hour from any river worth the name. I don't fish. But the thing on the other side of my door knew something about me that I didn't, and it said it the way you'd remind an old friend of where you'd met. Then it tried the handle. I heard the latch move, that specific metal click, and I watched the little lock button on my door, the one I'd thumbed down out of habit, strain upward against whatever was pulling it from outside. It held. Thank God it held. I started the engine. My hand was shaking so bad it took 2 tries to find the ignition. And the moment the diesel turned over and the lights flared, the breathing stopped, and the weight came off the side of the truck so fast the whole cab rocked back level on its springs. I threw it into gear, and I did not look in the mirrors, because some part of me understood that whatever it was wanted me to look, wanted me to see it standing out there in the lot, and I was not going to give it that. I drove with my high beams on and the heater roaring, and I did not stop again until the sun came up over the Bitterroots. When I finally pulled into a truck stop in Missoula, my hands were still locked around the wheel, and a waitress had to bring my coffee twice because I kept letting it go cold without drinking it. Here is the part I can't explain. When I climbed down to fuel up, I walked around to inspect the driver's side because I needed to see scratches, mud, claw marks, anything that would tell me a real animal had been there and not whatever my mind wanted to invent. The door was clean, spotless, but on the inside of my mirror housing, sealed metal and plastic, no gap, no way in, there was a handprint pressed against the back of the glass. 5 fingers and a palm, human-shaped, but too long in the fingers, the way the tracks had been too long in the stride. Pressed there from the inside, like something had reached through the glass and left it as a note. I had that mirror replaced in Missoula. I told the kid at the shop a rock kicked it. He didn't ask questions while he worked, but when he finally pried the old housing off, he went quiet, and he held it up to the shop light and turned it. And then he asked me, real careful, the way you ask a man you're worried about, where exactly I'd parked the night before. I told him, Belvedere. He set the mirror down on the bench and wiped his hands on his coveralls, and he said, "You're the 4th this winter." And then he wouldn't say anything else, no matter how I pushed him, except that I should get my route changed if I could, and that I should never, ever roll my window down at that rest area. Not even an inch. Not even to throw out a cup. I asked around after that, quietly, the way you do, at scales and weigh stations, and over coffee at 3 in the morning, where the only honest conversations on the road happen. Most guys laughed, but 2 didn't. An old hand out of Spokane named Dell told me his brother-in-law had stopped at Belvedere one January and come home different. Wouldn't sleep with the lights off, wouldn't drive nights anymore, took a warehouse job and a pay cut and never explained why. And a younger driver, a woman who ran reefer loads, just listened to my story with her jaw tight and then said one thing. Did it use a name it shouldn't have known? I told her about the river. She nodded like I'd confirmed something, paid for her coffee, and left without finishing it. I changed my route. I run the southern corridor now, through Wyoming, longer by the better part of a day. My dispatcher thinks I'm getting old and superstitious, and I let him think it, because the truth doesn't fit in a phone call. Maybe I am getting old, but 3 weeks ago I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. No name, no message, just a photograph of my old truck, the one I traded in, the one with the new mirror, parked at that same rest area outside Belvedere, taken at night, from low down near the ground, the angle of something crouching, and under the photo, 4 words, "You still smell like the river." I've always done my best thinking behind the wheel at night. That's probably why I took the job I took, a traveling hospice nurse, the kind that drives between rural towns where there isn't a regular nurse to spare, sitting with people in their last weeks. It's not a job that lets you keep normal hours. You drive a lot of empty highway in the dark, and you learn to be alone with your thoughts, because there's no one else out there to share them with. That night I was crossing the high desert of eastern Oregon, headed from Burns toward a ranch family outside Vail, where an old man was dying slow. It was the kind of cold that gets into the dashboard, and around 1 in the morning my eyes started doing that thing where the road signs swim. So I pulled into a little rest area off Highway 20. 1 building, 2 picnic shelters, a row of cottonwoods along a creek that ran behind the lot. There was a sign by the water, fast current, no swimming, old and rusted, the kind of sign that's been there longer than anyone who'd read it. I remember being grateful for the stop, if I'm honest. The family in Vale was a hard case. The old man had outlived 2 of his own children, and his surviving daughter sat by his bed all day with a kind of anger she didn't have anywhere to put. I'd been carrying that the whole drive, the way you do in my line of work, where other people's grief rides along in the passenger seat. I thought a few minutes of cold air and quiet would shake it loose. I got out to splash water on my face. The desert at night is so quiet it has a sound of its own, a kind of ringing in the ears. But under that, from down by the creek, I heard a child crying. Now I want you to understand something about me. I have sat with the dying for 19 years. I have held the hands of children in pediatric wards, and I have learned, the hard way, that you go toward the crying. You don't talk yourself out of it. You don't decide it's a coyote or the wind or your tired mind. You go, because the one time you don't is the time it was real and the time you'll never forgive yourself. So I went down toward the creek, and I'll admit my nurse's brain was already running its checklist. Lost child, exposure, hypothermia in this cold, how fast I'd need to get her warm, whether I had a foil blanket in the trunk. That checklist is the only thing that kept my feet moving, because every other part of me, the older animal part, had already started to whisper that there was no road for miles, no house, no car in the lot but mine, and no good reason for a small child to be alone by fast water at 1 in the morning. The crying got clearer as I walked. A little girl by the sound, maybe 6 or 7. The hitching, exhausted cry of a child who's been crying a long time and has almost run out of the energy for it. "I'm cold," she was saying between the sobs. "I'm so cold. I can't find my way back." I called out that I was coming, that I was a nurse, that everything was going to be all right. The cottonwoods were thick along the bank, and the moon was behind a cloud, and I had only the little flashlight off my keychain. I pushed through the brush toward the voice, and the voice kept moving, always just ahead, always a little farther along the bank, down toward where the creek bent, and the water ran fast and black. "I'm cold," she said. "Will you come down? It's not so bad once you're in. It's not so cold once you stop fighting it." And that's when I stopped, because a frightened child says she wants to get out of the cold. She doesn't invite you into it. A frightened child wants her mother, wants a blanket, wants to go home. She does not, in a small, patient voice, tell you that the water isn't so bad once you stop fighting it. I stood very still at the edge of the brush with the creek a few feet below me, fast and loud now, and I pointed my little light down at the water. And for just a second, in the beam, I saw her. She was standing in the middle of the current, in water that should have swept her off her feet, in a yellow dress that the fast black water moved through as if she weren't there at all. She was facing away from me. Her hair was wet and dark, and her little arms were down at her sides, and the water ran straight through where her legs should have been, and she was not cold, and she was not crying anymore, because she had heard me stop. She turned her head, just her head, all the way around, the rest of her still facing downstream, and her face, I'm sorry, I have tried to describe this to my husband and I can't do it justice. Her face was a child's face that had been underwater for a very long time, soft, pale, the eyes gone to a flat, milky white, and she smiled at me, with real sweetness, the way a little girl smiles when she's finally got a grown-up to play with. "You came," she said, delighted. "Nobody ever comes. Mama said nobody would ever come." I have never in my life felt the pull I felt then. It wasn't fear, exactly. It was the deepest, most maternal ache I have ever known. Every instinct I have, 19 years of going toward the crying, screaming at me to step down into that water and gather that freezing, lonely child into my arms and warm her and carry her home. My foot was already moving. I had one boot off the bank. The water touched the toe of it, and it was so cold it burned. What stopped me was the sign. Fast current, no swimming. Old and rusted. Longer than anyone who'd read it. I thought of all the years that sign had stood there, and I understood all at once why it was there, and how long she'd been waiting, and that she did not want to be saved. She wanted company. She wanted me to be as cold and as lost as she was, forever, so she wouldn't have to be alone in the dark water anymore. "I have to go," I told her. My voice came out broken. "Honey, I have to go. But I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry no one came." The smile fell off her face, and the crying started again. But it wasn't sad anymore. It was furious, the shriek of a child denied, and the water rose up over the banks toward my feet faster than water has any right to move, and I scrambled back up through the cottonwoods with the brush tearing at my arms, and that screaming following me all the way up to the lot. I don't remember the climb back to the car. I remember sitting in the driver's seat with the doors locked, which was absurd. Locks don't mean anything to a thing like that. Gripping the wheel and watching the tree line in case the yellow dress came up out of the brush after me. It didn't. They can't leave the water, I think. That's the mercy of it, if there is one. She has the creek, and she has whoever is foolish or kind enough to walk down to it. And that is the whole size of her world. I drove the rest of the way to Vail with the heater on full, and my hands aching from the cold that had gotten into the one boot. I sat with my dying old man for 2 days. And on the drive home I took a different highway, 100 miles out of my way. And I have never once gone back to Highway 20. But here is the thing I can't stop thinking about. When I got home, I looked it up. That creek floods every spring when the snowpack melts off the blues. And in the spring of 1974, the county newspaper ran 3 lines about a family passing through who'd stopped to let their kids stretch their legs, and a little girl, 6 years old, who went down to look at the water and was carried off by the fast current and never recovered. They searched for a week. They put up the sign that summer. Her name was Lucy. In the article, her mother called her Lulu. I think about her every cold night I drive, which is most of them. I don't think she's evil. I think she's 6 years old, and she's been alone in that black water for 50 years, and she's just so cold, and she only wants someone to stay. I hope, wherever the truly lost ones go, that someone finally comes for Lulu. I just couldn't be the one. God forgive me, I couldn't be the one. My name is Dale, and I was a ranger on the Blue Ridge Parkway for 9 years before I put in my transfer to a desk in Asheville and never looked back. People always want the desk job version of that story to be about budget cuts or a bad back. It wasn't. It was a voice in the woods, and I'm only telling it now because the man it happened with is dead, and he can't be embarrassed by it anymore. The Parkway is beautiful, in the way a thing can be beautiful and wrong at the same time. 469 miles of 2-lane road riding the spine of the mountains, with overlooks every few miles where tourists pull off to take their photos of the blue ridges fading into haze. In summer, it's all families and motorcycles, but in the shoulder seasons, on the high stretches up past 5,000 feet, you can drive an hour without seeing another soul, and the forest comes right up to the edge of the asphalt, old and dark and close. There's an unwritten rule the old rangers passed down, and like most rules, nobody bothers to write down. I didn't take it seriously until it mattered. The rule was, if you're working an overlook alone after dark, and you hear somebody call your name from the tree line, don't answer, and don't go look. Wait for them to come to you. A real lost hiker will come toward the road and the lights. The rule didn't say what the other thing does. It didn't have to. I'd heard the rule my first week from an old ranger named Hollis, a man who'd worked the Parkway since the 60s, and had a way of saying serious things like he was telling you where the good fishing was. We were eating lunch at an overlook, and a tourist hollered to his kid across the lot, and Hollis stopped chewing and watched the tree line until the kid hollered back. Then he relaxed. Echoes up here come back wrong, is all he said. Later, end of the season, drunk enough to be honest, he told me the rest. That the mountains hold on to voices, that there's something up high that collects them, gathers them off the wind, off lost hikers, off the dying, and keeps them, and uses them. He said his own father, a logger, had warned him as a boy. The woods will call you in the voice you love most, because that's the one you won't question. I wrote it off as mountain talk. I was young. Everybody's young once, right up until they aren't. The night it happened, I was closing up the Black Balsam overlook with a seasonal kid named Petey. 20 years old, good heart, scared of nothing because he hadn't lived long enough yet to learn what's worth being scared of. We'd had a report of a car left in the lot past closing, and we'd come up to check it wasn't a stranded hiker or, God forbid, a body. The car was empty, cold, been there hours by the dew on the windshield. That's when the voice called out of the woods. Dale, Dale, over here, I'm hurt. And here's the thing, it was a voice I knew. It was Sam Coyle, another ranger, a friend of mine, who I knew for a fact was off that week, fishing down in Brevard. It had his exact gravel, the little catch he got in his throat. If I hadn't known where Sam was, I'd have run straight into the trees without a second thought. That's how good it was. Petey started toward the tree line. I grabbed his arm hard enough to bruise it, and I said low, "That's not Sam." And the kid looked at me like I'd lost my mind, because of course it was Sam. He could hear it was Sam. Anybody could hear it. "Dale," the voice called again. "I fell. My legs broke. Please, man, I'm scared." And it did the catch in the throat, the little break. Perfect. Too perfect. Because the thing about a real friend's voice is it surprises you. The words come out in an order you don't expect. This kept saying the same handful of phrases, rearranged. "Dale, over here. I'm hurt. I fell. I'm scared." Like a child with a small bag of words, shaking them and laying them out in new patterns, hoping one of the patterns was the key that turned the lock and brought you in. My hands had gone cold, and not from the air, because I was remembering Hollis at that overlook, watching the trees, and I understood for the first time that he hadn't been listening to make sure the kid was okay. He'd been listening to make sure it was the kid. So I did the only thing I could think to do. I tested it. I keyed my radio and called Sam Coyle's personal cell on speaker, right there in the lot, loud as I could. He picked up on the third ring, irritated, a ball game on in the background, very much in brevard. "Dale, it's 9 o'clock, what?" And the voice in the woods went quiet. Completely quiet. The whole forest did. No crickets, no wind. That pressure drop silence like the moment before thunder. Then it tried again. But it had run out of Sam. So it used me. "Dale," it said, in my own voice. My voice. The exact sound I make. The sound you never hear from outside your own head. "Dale, it's 9 o'clock, what?" It had taken the words right off my phone, off the air, and given them back to me in my own mouth. And then it laughed, my laugh, but stretched too long, going up at the end into something that was not a laugh at all, and it started walking. I couldn't see it, but I could hear the brush moving, slow and heavy, parallel to the tree line, pacing us, the way the breathing in that other man's story paced his truck. Working along the edge of the light, looking for a gap. Petey wasn't smiling anymore. I got him into the truck and I got the doors locked and I drove us down off that mountain at speeds you're not supposed to drive that road. And the whole way down, every quarter mile or so, from the dark trees flashing past the windows, I heard it call my name in my own voice. Keeping up, which is not possible, because nothing on two legs keeps up with a truck. Petey was crying by the time we hit the lower switchbacks, not making a sound about it, just tears running down while he stared straight ahead. I didn't say anything to comfort him because there wasn't anything true I could have said. At the bottom, where the parkway meets the highway and there are streetlights and a gas station and the ordinary world starts back up, the calling finally stopped. We sat in that gas station lot for a long time with the engine running. Petey asked me, eventually, in a small voice, whether it had really sounded like me, or whether he'd imagined that part. I told him the truth. I told him it had sounded exactly like me, down to the last breath, and that I hoped to God he never heard a thing where his own voice, because there is no lonelier sound in this world. We filed an incident report that said, "Possible distressed individual, unable to locate." That's the official record. Petey quit at the end of the season and went back to school, and we never once talked about it again. Though we'd nod at each other a certain way when our paths crossed, two men who'd agreed without agreeing to keep a secret. I put in for my transfer that winter. I sit at a desk now. I'm fine with it. I told you the man it happened with is dead, and that's why I can tell it. I meant Sam Coyle. He didn't believe me, laughed it off, said I'd let a kid spook me and an echo do the rest. He kept working the high overlooks alone after dark, because he was stubborn and because nothing had ever called his name and meant it. They found his truck at the graveyard fields overlook 2 autumns ago, empty, the door open, the dew on the windshield. They searched those woods for 11 days with dogs and a helicopter and 100 volunteers. They never found one thread of him. But on the 4th night of the search, one of the dog handlers came back white as paper and asked to be taken off the line, and wouldn't say why for a long time. When she finally did, she said that out past the searchlights, from deep in the dark where no searcher had gone yet, she'd heard a man calling for help, in Sam Coyle's voice, calling her name. The payphone shouldn't have been ringing, because the payphone shouldn't have existed. That was the first wrong thing, before any of the rest of it. I'm Javier. For 15 years, I've run an overnight courier route out of Las Vegas. Sensitive documents, lab samples, the occasional locked case I'm paid not to ask about. Up the lonely 95 corridor toward Tonopah, and the little town strung along it like beads on a dark wire. It's good work for a man who likes his own company. You learn the desert at night. You learn which pull-offs have lights and which ones don't. And you learn that the ones that don't are the ones you keep driving past. The close call my wife made me promise about had happened 3 weeks before. I'd microslept on the long, straight north of Indian Springs and woken up with 2 wheels off the asphalt and my heart trying to climb out of my mouth. I didn't tell her how close it had been, but she's been married to me long enough to read it off my face, and she'd made me swear, hand on our daughter's photo, the whole ceremony, that I would pull over the second my eyes got heavy. So when they got heavy that night, I heard her voice in my head, and I pulled over. I've thought a lot about whether that promise saved me or set me up. I still don't know. The rest area I stopped at that night was one I'd passed 1,000 times and never used. Just a gravel apron, a vault toilet, a single dead lamppost. But I'd been fighting sleep for an hour, and I'd promised my wife after the last close call that I'd start pulling over instead of pushing through. So I pulled over, and there in my headlights, at the edge of the gravel where I'd swear on my children there had never been anything but creosote brush, stood a phone booth. The old kind. Glass and aluminum, a folding door, a light inside that didn't work. And it was ringing. I want to tell you I drove away. A smart man drives away. But it's 2 in the morning in the middle of the Nevada desert, 40 miles from the nearest anything, and a phone is ringing in a booth that has no wires running to it. I checked, later, with my own flashlight. No line, no conduit, nothing but the booth standing on the dirt like it had been set down from above. And the sound of it is the loneliest, most insistent sound you have ever heard. It pulls at you. You answer phones. Your whole life has trained you to answer a ringing phone. So I got out, and I walked over, and I picked it up. The voice on the other end was mine. Not a voice like mine. Mine, the voice you only hear on a recording and hate, the one that sounds nothing like the voice in your head. It was breathing hard, like it had been running, and it said, fast, low, urgent. Javier, listen to me. You don't have time. Don't look at the sky. Whatever you do, when it gets quiet, do not look up. Get in the truck and drive and do not stop until Tonopah. My first thought, I'm ashamed to say, was a prank. A coworker, a cousin, somebody who knew my route, somebody with a soundboard. But there's no cell signal at that pull-off. I've got a dead zone map memorized. It's part of the job. And there's no power to a booth with no wires. And nobody, not the cleverest prankster alive, sounds that much like you. The voice had my exact pauses. It said my name the way I say it when I'm scared, with the accent coming back the way it only does when I forget to flatten it for the dispatchers. I said, "What do you say?" I said, "Who is this?" And my own voice on the line said, "I'm you. From 11 minutes from now. And I made the wrong choice. Please. Don't look at the sky." Then the line went dead, and the desert went quiet. I don't mean it got quiet. I mean it went quiet the way a room goes quiet when the music stops. All at once, total. A silence with edges. The wind that had been pushing grit across the gravel stopped mid-gust. The cooling tick of my engine stopped. Even the ringing in my own ears, that high desert whine, cut out. I stood there in a silence so complete I could hear the blood moving in my head. And every instinct I have, 15 years of them, told me to look up. There is something in a man that has to see the thing it's afraid of. The sky was right there. That enormous desert sky stuffed with more stars than a city person ever sees. And something in it had made the whole world hold its breath. And I needed to know what. I put my forehead against the cold glass of that booth and I shut my eyes and I prayed in Spanish, the prayers my grandmother taught me, and I did not look up. I felt it pass over. I can't describe it better than that. A pressure, a weight, a coldness sliding across the top of the world, the way you feel a big truck pass you on the shoulder even with your eyes closed. That displacement of air, that nearness of mass. It took its time. It knew I was there. I think it was waiting for me to look. The way that thing in the woods waits for you to answer. The way the cold water waits for you to step in. Looking was the door. Looking was the yes. I didn't look. And then the wind came back. All at once, mid-gust, exactly where it had left off, and the engine ticked, and the ringing returned to my ears, and I was just a man standing at a payphone in the desert with his forehead against the glass and tears on his face. I got in the truck. I drove. I did not stop until Tonopah, just like the voice said, and I sat in the all-night diner there until the sun came up, and the waitress refilled my coffee and didn't ask why my hand shook. Here is what I keep coming back to. The voice said it was me, 11 minutes from then, and that it had made the wrong choice, that it had looked up. So somewhere, in some version of that night, there's a Javier who looked, and whatever happened to him was bad enough that he found a phone with no wires, in a booth that shouldn't exist, in a loop of time I don't understand, and he spent what might have been the last clear seconds he had, trying to warn the only person who'd believe him, himself. I went back in daylight, a week later, with my brother and 2 flashlights and a camera, because I needed it to not be real. The gravel apron was there, the vault toilet, the dead lamppost. No phone booth, no footing where one had stood, no wires, no scar in the dirt. My brother walked the whole apron twice with his flashlight, humoring me, and then he stood in the spot where the booth had been and spread his hands like, "See, nothing." And the wind was blowing, and the brush was rattling, and it was the most ordinary, empty place in the world. He thinks I fell asleep at the wheel and dreamed the booth and the call both. Maybe he's right. I want him to be right. A dream I can live with. A dream means there's only one of me, and he's standing in the diner ordering huevos, and nobody got left behind in the quiet under that sky. But my phone, my real phone, the one in my pocket, has a call in its log from that night. 2 in the morning, 11 minutes long, from my own number, and I never made it. So let me ask you, because I've asked myself every night since and I can't decide, if you picked up a phone in the middle of nowhere and heard your own voice, out of breath, begging you not to look up, would you trust it and keep your eyes down and drive? Or would you have to know? Would you have to look? Be honest with yourself, because I think the whole thing only works on the ones who have to look, and I think there are more of us than will admit it. Let me know in the comments below, and if you're driving the 95 tonight and you see a light where there shouldn't be one, do me a favor, keep your eyes on the road. You want to know what real fear is? It isn't ghosts. I've made my peace with the idea of ghosts. A ghost can't do anything to you that being dead won't do anyway. Real fear is another living person, out in the middle of nowhere, who has decided that you are alone enough to be a problem they can solve. I learned that on Interstate 80 in Wyoming, in the worst blizzard I've ever driven, and there isn't a single thing supernatural about it, which is exactly why it still wakes me up. I've lived in Wyoming my whole life, so I'm not soft about winter. When the wind comes off the high plains, it blows the snow sideways, and the world turns into a white nothing, where you can't tell the ground from the sky. That night, the highway patrol had started closing gates behind me, town by town, and I knew if I didn't get off the interstate soon, I'd be spending the night in a drift. So when the sign for the rest area near Elk Mountain swam up out of the white, I took it. There was one other vehicle in the lot, a panel van, no windows in the back, parked crooked across 2 spaces with its engine running and its lights off. I should have left right then. I want that on the record. Something about that van bothered me before I could put words to it. The way your body knows a thing a few seconds before your brain agrees to it. But the wind was screaming, and the visibility was 0, and the warm yellow light of the rest area building looked like the only safe place in 100 frozen miles. So I parked a good distance from the van, near the building, and I went inside to wait out the worst of it. The building was the standard kind, vending machines, a map of the state behind scratched plastic, a hallway to the restrooms, big windows looking out at the white. I bought a coffee I didn't want from the machine just to have something hot in my hands. And after a few minutes the door opened behind me, and a man came in, stamping snow off his boots, friendly, ordinary, big, soft-spoken, a hunting cap. He nodded at me. I nodded back. He bought a coffee too, and he started to talk. He was good at it. That's the part I keep circling back to. He was so good at it. Where was I headed? Was I traveling alone? Did anyone know my route? Was anybody expecting me tonight? All of it folded so naturally into friendly small talk that I answered the first two before the pattern of the questions started to itch at the back of my neck. Was I alone? Did anyone know where I was? When would someone start to worry? These are not the questions a bored stranger asks. These are the questions a man asks when he's taking inventory. I lied. I want to tell anyone listening who's ever felt that itch. Lie. Lie immediately. Lie without flinching. I told him my husband was 40 minutes behind me in the second truck, that we ran as a pair in bad weather, that he'd be pulling in any minute and would worry if he didn't see me out front. I have no husband. I made him up on the spot, gave him a name, gave him a truck, gave him a temper, and I watched something behind the man's friendly face do a quiet little recalculation. The warmth didn't leave his eyes exactly. It just thinned. Like a layer of ice you suddenly realize is thinner than you thought. That's smart, he said. Running in pairs, roads like this. And he smiled and went to look at the map. I did not run for my truck because running tells them it's started. I finished my coffee with hands I forced to be steady. I said something about checking the road report, and I walked out the front like a woman with a husband 40 minutes behind her, unhurried, annoyed at the weather, ordinary. I got in my truck and I locked it, and I did not turn on my headlights. I just put it in gear and rolled out of that lot in the dark, by feel, watching the van in my mirror. The van's lights came on the second mine should have, and it pulled out after me. I had maybe a 30-second head start, and I spent it doing the only useful thing I could think of. I called 911 on speaker as I drove, and the dispatcher's voice came through calm and far away, asking my location, and I gave her mile markers as they crawled past in the headlights, and described the van, and told her a man was following me. She stayed on the line. That voice, a stranger in a warm room somewhere, typing, calm, was the only thing between me and total panic, and I held on to it the way you'd hold a rope over a cliff. What followed was the worst hour of my life, and I have buried both my parents. He followed me onto the interstate, into a whiteout where you couldn't see 50 feet, matching my speed, hanging back just far enough that I couldn't read a plate. When I sped up, he sped up. When I slowed to make him pass, he slowed. He stayed with me for 11 miles. I counted the markers. It was the only thing keeping me from coming apart. Through snow so thick I was steering by the rumble strip and praying there was nothing stopped in the road ahead, because I could not have stopped for it. What saved me was a plow. A great roaring orange highway plow came up the on-ramp at Walcott with its lights blazing and its blade throwing a wall of snow, and I did the only thing I could think of. I got right up on its tail, close enough to scare us both, and I flashed my brights and laid on my horn until the driver got on the CB, and I could explain, half hysterical, that the van behind me had been following me for 11 miles, and would he please, please, stay between us and call the patrol. He did. God bless that plow driver, whoever he was. He called it in, and he babysat me all the way to Rollins with the van hanging back in the white, and somewhere before the lights of town, the van peeled off at an exit and was gone. By the time the lights of Rollins came up out of the storm, I was shaking so hard I could barely keep the truck in the lane. I'd been clenched around the wheel for an hour, and my hands had locked into the shape of it. The dispatcher had to tell me 3 times that I could pull in now, that there were officers waiting, before the words made it through. The patrol met me at a gas station. I gave them everything, the van, the crooked parking, the questions, the 11 miles. They were kind, and they took it seriously, and they told me, gently, that there wasn't much they could do with no plate and no crime. That a man following you in a blizzard isn't, technically, against the law. One of the older troopers walked me to my truck after, though, and before I got in, he said something I've never forgotten. He said they get a few of these every bad winter, that there are men who work the closed highways in storms the way other men work a trap line, because a blizzard does their job for them. No witnesses, no cameras working, no one expecting you for days. The weather isolates the prey, and all they have to do is wait in the warm light where the cold drives everyone eventually. The ones who make it, he told me, are almost always the ones who lied about being alone. Remember that. If it ever happens again, you've got people right behind you. Always. No matter what. I've driven a lot of winter nights since. I always tell them someone's behind me now. Always. But here's the thing I didn't tell the trooper, because I only put it together later, lying awake. When that man asked if anyone knew my route, before I lied, in the half-second before I lied, I had glanced, just glanced, at my phone on the counter, and on the lock screen was a photo of me, alone, smiling, no husband, no second truck, my whole solitary life right there on the glass for anyone standing close enough to see. He'd been standing close enough to see. He let me go anyway. I think about that more than the 11 miles. He had the truth in front of him, and he chose to believe my husband was coming. Not because I was convincing, but because he decided the night was young, and there'd be another woman, alone, who didn't think to lie. I think about the ocean differently now. Most people hear waves and they relax. It's the sound they put on machines to help babies sleep. I hear waves and my chest gets tight, because I know now that the sound isn't empty. There's something underneath it. There's a rhythm under the rhythm, and once you've heard it, you can't unhear it. I was 20 that fall, driving down the Oregon coast alone after a breakup that had hollowed me out worse than I wanted to admit. The plan, such as it was, had been to drive the 101 until I felt like a person again. Cliffs on one side, the gray Pacific on the other, those little gravel turnouts every few miles where you can pull over and look at the view and feel appropriately small. I'd been crying on and off for 200 miles. I pulled into one of those turnouts a little after midnight because I was too tired and too sad to trust myself at the wheel, and I figured I'd sleep a couple hours with the sound of the water. I should explain the state I was in, because I think it matters. I think it's why it almost worked. She'd ended things in the kind of way that doesn't leave you angry, just emptied out, like someone had reached in and unplugged something. I hadn't eaten a real meal in days. I'd been driving on gas station coffee and the radio, and the idea that motion was the same as healing. When you're like that, hollowed and exhausted and aching for any kind of relief, you are not the careful animal you usually are. Your guard is down. Looking back, I think that's the condition the thing in the water hunts for. Not the lost, exactly. The ones who've stopped minding being lost. The turnout was just a crescent of gravel with a low guardrail and a steep path down to a little pocket beach. No lights. No other cars. Below me, the ocean was doing what the ocean does at night, which is be enormous and black and patient. I reclined the seat. I cracked the window an inch for the air, and I listened to the waves, and I started, finally, to feel something in me loosen. That's when I noticed the rhythm was wrong. Waves aren't regular. That's the whole point of them, the reason they're soothing, the randomness, the long one, and then the 3 short ones, and then the lull. But the longer I lay there, the more I realized the sound coming up from that beach had settled into a pattern. A long pull, a pause, a long pull, a pause. Even, mechanical, like breathing. Like something very large down there in the dark water, breathing slow and deep, and the waves were just what the breathing did to the surface. I told myself I was exhausted and grief-addled, and hearing patterns and noise the way you see faces in wallpaper. But then, under the breathing, came the other sound. A voice. Or not a voice, voices, many of them, far down and far away, all saying the same thing at the same slow tempo as the waves. I couldn't make out words at first, just the shape of them, rising on each long pull of water and fading in each pause. I should have rolled up the window and driven away. Instead, I did the stupid thing, the thing I've watched people in movies do and yelled at the screen about. I got out of the car, because I had to hear the words. The cold hit me, and the wind, and the smell of the sea. But stronger than the salt was something else underneath it. A deep, low reek of things that live where light doesn't reach. I walked to the guardrail, and now I could hear the words, carried up on that slow, even rhythm from the black water. Dozens of voices speaking together, calm and welcoming, the way a crowd at a party turns to greet someone they've been waiting for. "Bring the anchor," they said. Pause. "Bring the anchor down. It's so quiet here. Bring the anchor down." And I understood, not with my mind. My mind was screaming, but with something older, the part of me that knew about the van before my brain agreed. That the anchor was me. That down there in the deep, patient dark, something had been waiting a very long time. And it was lonely, the way only enormous, old things are lonely. And it wanted to be tethered to the warm, shallow world up here. and a person walking down to the water in grief and exhaustion in the middle of the night was exactly the kind of weight it could use. My foot was already on the path. I want to be honest about that. I don't remember deciding to go down to the beach, but I was 3 steps down the path before I caught myself, with the voices swelling and the slow breathing of the water pulling at something behind my sternum, like a hook set in deep. The path down was wet and slick, and I could hear the gravel of it shifting under my sneakers, and I remember the strangest detail. I wasn't cold anymore. I'd been freezing at the guardrail, and the moment my feet were on the path going down, a warmth came up to meet me. A heavy, comfortable warmth, like sinking into a bath. And it came from the direction of the black water, which made no sense, because the Pacific in October is cold enough to stop your heart. The warmth was a lie. I know that now. It was the lure on the hook. It would have been so easy. That's the thing nobody tells you. It wasn't terror that drew me. It was peace. The voices promised it was quiet down there, and I was so tired of the noise in my own head. The breakup, the crying, the long, hollow drive. And they knew it. They knew exactly what I was carrying, and they offered to take it. What broke it was my phone. It buzzed in my pocket, a text, just spam, an automated thing about a package, the most stupid, mundane interruption in the world. But it lit up my pocket and buzzed against my leg, and it was so ordinary, so human, so much from the warm, shallow world, that it snapped the line. The voices faltered, the rhythm stuttered, and in that half-second of broken spell, I turned and scrambled back up the path and into my car, and I drove, shaking, with the windows up and the heater on, and the radio turned to the loudest, dumbest pop station I could find. Anything to drown out the rhythm that I could still feel more than hear. I drove until the sun came up. By daylight, the ocean was just the ocean, gray and ordinary, gulls and a guy walking his dog on a beach somewhere below. I almost convinced myself. I went looking, later, for some explanation. I found out that stretch of coast has a bad history with that turnout. Not dramatic, no headlines, just a quiet overrepresentation in a certain kind of statistic. People who pull over there at night and are never seen again. No bodies, which the Coast Guard will tell you is normal. The currents take them out. Cars found locked or unlocked, keys in the ignition, a phone on the seat, and a single set of footprints going down the path to the water and none coming back. The locals don't park there after dark. I asked a man at a bait shop about it, and he just looked at me for a long moment and said, "You stopped there, didn't you?" And when I nodded, he didn't ask anything else. He just told me I was lucky and rang up my coffee and wouldn't take my money for it. I'm okay now, mostly. I finished school. I have a job, an apartment, a life that's 1,000 miles inland on purpose. But I want to tell you the part that I can't make ordinary no matter how I try. I still hear it. Not all the time, but on certain nights, when it's very quiet and I'm very tired, and the old hollow feeling comes back, I'll catch it underneath other sounds, under the hum of the refrigerator, under the fan, under the white noise I have to run to sleep at all anymore. That slow, even rhythm, a long pull, a pause, and those far-off, patient voices, fainter than memory, still saying the same thing they said from the black water that night. They're still calling for the anchor. They haven't given up on me. I don't think they ever give up on the ones who took 3 steps down the path. I just make very, very sure, on the bad nights, that I never take the 4th. My name is Beatrice. I'm 63 years old. I taught middle school English in San Antonio for 31 years. And I am not the kind of woman who imagines things. I graded 10,000 essays on whether the green light in Gatsby was real or symbolic. I have a very firm grip on the difference between what's there and what isn't. I tell you that so you'll understand how much it cost me to say that one afternoon at a rest area on Interstate 10, the difference came apart in my hands. I was driving out to Fort Stockton to see my sister, a drive I'd made a dozen times. West Texas does something to your sense of scale. The road runs so straight and the land is so flat and empty that you can drive for an hour and feel like you haven't moved at all. Like the truck is just idling and they're rolling the same scenery past you on a loop. Somewhere out past Junction I needed to use the restroom, and a rest area came up, a nice modern one, with a stone picnic pavilion and a Texas-shaped welcome sign and a low building with the little man and woman icons on the doors. 3 or 4 other cars in the lot. An ordinary afternoon, bright and hot, 2 o'clock in the day. Nothing about it the slightest bit frightening. I want to stress that. It was broad daylight. There was one small thing, before I went in, that I only remembered later. An older woman was sitting at one of the picnic tables under the stone pavilion, not eating, not on a phone, just sitting very upright and still in the heat, facing the restroom building. As I walked past, she watched me, and she said quietly, not quite to me, "Don't stop moving in there." I thought she was one of those poor souls who talk to strangers, the kind you smile at and keep walking past. I smiled at her and kept walking past. I have wondered ever since how long she'd been sitting at that table, whether she'd come out, once, the way I did, whether she came out at all. I went into the ladies' room. It was clean and cool and empty. A row of stalls, a row of sinks, a long mirror, the hum of fluorescent lights. I used the facilities. I washed my hands. I looked at myself in the mirror the way you do, and thought I should drink more water. And then I went to leave. The door I'd come in through opened onto another row of sinks. I thought I'd gotten turned around. It's an easy thing. These buildings are symmetrical. So I crossed that second room to the door on its far side, and that door opened onto another room of stalls. Identical. Same number, same cool hum, same long mirror. I went through that one, and it opened onto sinks again. Stalls, sinks, stalls. The same room, or rooms so alike I could not tell them apart, opening one onto the next, and no matter which door I chose, and I started choosing carefully. I'm a methodical woman. I tried always the left, then always the right. None of them opened onto the parking lot, onto the heat, onto the welcome sign and my car and the ordinary world. I want to describe the quality of the panic because it wasn't like being chased. It was worse in a way, because there was nothing to run from. It was the panic of arithmetic that won't add up. I had walked by then much farther than the little building could possibly contain. I had been through more rooms than there was building to hold them. The fluorescent lights hummed, and the air was that same processed cool, and there was no dust, no graffiti, no water spots, no sign that any human being had ever used these rooms at all. They were too clean, the way a rendering is too clean, a picture of a restroom rather than a restroom. And then the announcement came, from speakers I couldn't see, in the calm, pleasant voice they use in airports, a woman's voice, warm and recorded, and absolutely without mercy. "Attention travelers, the current state is temporary. Please remain stationary for calibration. Do not attempt to exit the facility. Repeat, do not attempt to exit the facility. Calibration is in progress. Thank you for your patience." I tried my phone, of course. No signal, not one bar, not searching, but a flat blank where the signal indicator should be, as if the phone itself didn't believe there was a world out there to connect to. I tried the stall windows. There were no windows. I tried counting, marking the rooms, leaving my sunglasses on a sink to know if I came back to the same one, and 3 rooms later, there they were on a sink, my sunglasses. Except I hadn't circled back. I'd gone in a straight line, and that was the moment, the methodical part of me, the part that graded the essays and kept the careful records, simply stopped being able to help. I am not ashamed to tell you I sat down on the cool tile floor and cried. I'm a grandmother. I had been driving to see my sister, and a voice in the ceiling of an infinite bathroom was thanking me for my patience while it calibrated me to something, and I understood with perfect clarity that if I remained stationary, I would still be sitting on that floor when the world ended, patient, calibrated, gone. So I did the opposite of what it said. That's the only thing I did right. 31 years of teaching 13-year-olds teaches you that the instruction delivered in the calmest, most authoritative voice is sometimes the one designed to make you stop fighting. I got up off the floor, and I did not remain stationary, and I did not wait for calibration. I started going through the doors as fast as I could, slamming them open, not choosing carefully anymore, just moving, because motion was the one thing the voice had told me not to do. I don't know how many rooms, 20, 50. The lights began to flicker as I moved, first one room, then more, the hum dropping in pitch, the announcement starting to repeat itself faster and overlapping with itself. Remain stationary, do not attempt, layering into a wall of that pleasant voice that wasn't pleasant anymore. And in the long mirrors as I ran past them, my reflection started to lag. Just a fraction. I'd be at the next door, and the woman in the mirror would still be turning toward it. By the last few rooms, she wasn't following me at all. She was standing still in every mirror, calm, hands folded, watching me run, remaining stationary, calibrated, while I refused to be. I hit a door with my shoulder and fell out onto hot asphalt under a blazing 2 o'clock sun, scraping both palms bloody on the gravel, and a man getting into his truck 2 spaces over stared at me like I'd lost my mind. I had been gone, by his reckoning, about 4 minutes. I'd gone into the restroom, and 4 minutes later I'd come bursting out the same door, the only door, the front door, the one I could not find from the inside for what had felt like an hour. I didn't go on to Fort Stockton. I turned around and drove home to San Antonio with both hands stinging on the wheel, and I called my sister and made up a story about car trouble, and I have never driven that stretch of I-10 again. I fly to El Paso now and she picks me up. It costs more. I don't care. Here's what I can't put down. My palms healed, but I have 2 small scars where the gravel cut them, and they ache, both of them, at the same time, every so often, with no warning. And every single time they ache, if I happen to be near a mirror, my reflection is a half-second slow, just for a moment, just long enough for me to catch her standing still while I move, hands folded, patient, before she snaps back into place and pretends she was with me all along. I don't think I ever fully got out. I think a part of me is still in there, remaining stationary, being calibrated, and the scars are the thread that ties the two of me together. So let me ask you, and please think about it before you answer. If a calm, official, reasonable voice told you to stop moving and wait, promised you that everything was temporary, that all you had to do was be patient, how long would you obey before you realized that the instruction itself was the trap? Most of us are raised to obey that voice. I almost did. Let me know in the comments below, and the next time a rest stop bathroom feels a little too clean, a little too quiet, do me a favor and keep one hand on the door you came in through. I found the notebook wedged behind the paper towel dispenser, and I almost threw it in the trash without opening it. I think about that a lot, how close I came to just tossing it. Everything after would never have happened. But I'm the kind of person who can't not read something, a receipt, a billboard, the back of a cereal box. So I opened it. And that's the whole reason I'm telling you this instead of living a normal life. I've worked for the Michigan Department of Transportation for 6 years, mostly maintenance on the rest areas along the northern stretch of I-75, up toward the bridge. In winter, it's lonely work. Half the rest areas get half their traffic, and the St. Ignace Welcome Center, where I was that night, sometimes goes hours between cars after dark. I was on the late shift, doing the restroom and the lobby, mopping, restocking, the usual. When I found the notebook behind the dispenser in the men's room, it was an ordinary black composition book, the kind kids use for school. No name on the cover. I flipped it open expecting a grocery list or somebody's bad poetry, and the first thing I read stopped me cold, because it was about me. 9 p.m., it said, in small, neat handwriting. Toby arrives at the St. Ignace Welcome Center. The snow is light. He stamps his boots 3 times on the rubber mat and signs in on the clipboard with the pen that barely works, scratching it twice to get the ink going. I had stamped my boots 3 times. Everyone does. It's the mat. It's nothing. But the pen by the clipboard had been dry, and I'd scratched it twice, exactly twice, to start the ink, not 5 minutes before, alone, with no one in the building. I stood there in the men's room reading about myself stamping my boots, and a cold went through me that had nothing to do with the season. My first thought was that one of the other crew was messing with me. We do that, the night guys, leave each other notes, hide the good mop, ordinary boredom stuff. But the handwriting wasn't anyone's I knew, and more than that, it was getting details no coworker could have, the pen scratching twice, the exact number of boot stamps. Things I did without thinking, things you'd have to be standing right at my shoulder to catch. And there was no one at my shoulder. I'd checked the cameras at the start of my shift like I always do. The building was empty, every lot bare but for my own truck under the lights. I flipped ahead. The handwriting filled maybe a third of the book, and it was all me, all that night. 9:15, Toby refills the paper towels in the women's room and finds the second dispenser jammed. He curses and skips it. I had skipped it. It was jammed. I'd cursed. 9:40, Toby eats the sandwich his wife packed, ham, And he picks the tomato off because she always puts tomato on even though he's told her for 9 years that he hates it on a cold sandwich. My wife, the tomato, 9 years. The sandwich was still in my cooler in the break room. I had not eaten it yet. It was 9:31. Let me say that again, because it's the part that made me sit down. The entry was about something I had not done yet. And at 9:40, against every screaming instinct, I watched myself get the sandwich out and pick the tomato off, because I was hungry, and I'd be damned if a notebook was going to dictate whether I ate. And the moment I set the tomato on the napkin, I understood that whether I'd chosen it or not, it had been written first. I should have stopped reading. I want that understood. There is a kind of person who, told the future is in the book, closes the book. I am not that person. I read on, fast now, my hands not quite steady, skimming ahead through 10 p.m., 11 p.m., my whole night laid out in that small, neat hand. Every cup of coffee, every car that pulled in and left, a trucker who'd asked to use the phone, the moment the furnace would kick on with a bang that would make me jump, and I started checking them off as they came true, one after another, like a horrible little schedule I was both reading and starring in. And then I got to the end of the writing. The handwriting stopped partway down a page, mid-sentence, the way you'd stop if someone interrupted you. The last complete entry read, 12:50 a.m. Toby has read this far. He understands now that the writing always stays a few minutes ahead of him, and he is afraid to read the next line, because some part of him already knows what kind of entry comes at the end of a night like this. And then, after a gap, in slightly different, hurried handwriting, 3 more words had been added at the bottom of the page. Fresh, the ink still catching the light wet. Turn around, Toby. I did not turn around. I want to be honest about the cowardice of it. I didn't turn around because I knew, the way you know in a dream, that the entire point was for me to turn around, that turning around was the next line, that whatever stood behind me had written the instruction precisely so I would obey it and complete the sentence the book was waiting to finish. So I did the one thing the book hadn't accounted for. I closed it. I closed the notebook, and I held it shut with both hands, and I shut my eyes, and I stood there in the humming lobby, and I did not read, and I did not turn, and I did not move, for what the clock later told me was 19 minutes. 19 minutes is a very long time to stand still with your eyes shut in an empty building. I counted my own breaths to get through it. I thought about my wife asleep at home, and the tomato she'd keep putting on my sandwiches, and how badly I wanted to be the kind of ordinary, tired man who complains about tomatoes, and how I would never complain about anything that small again if I could just get out of that lobby. I felt it behind me the whole time, a presence, patient, close, reading over my shoulder at a page I'd closed, waiting for me to give it the one thing it needed, which was my participation. The cold got worse, the lights buzzed. Once, something touched the back of my collar, light as a pencil tip, the way you'd tap someone to get them to turn around. I didn't turn around. I prayed, badly, out of practice, and I held the book shut. At 1:09 by the lobby clock, the cold lifted. All at once, the way the weight came off that trucker's cab. The lights steadied, the furnace banged on, ordinary, and the building was just a building again, mine, empty, the snow ticking against the glass. I want to mention one more thing about the book itself because it's bothered me for 2 years. When I closed it that night and held it shut, it was warm. Not room warm. Warm like a thing that's alive, like holding a cat in your lap. A faint warmth coming up out of the cover into my palms, and a faint movement too. So slight I told myself I imagined it, like the pages were turning very slowly against each other on the inside of a book I was holding clamped shut with all my strength. I took the notebook out to the dumpster, and I did not open it again, and I drove home before my shift was even over, and I never told my supervisor why. I put in for days after that. I won't work St. Ignace alone at night. I'd quit before I would, but that's not why I won't read anymore. Not newspapers, not the back of the cereal box, nothing I don't have to. Because a week after that night, sorting the mail, I found among the bills a single black composition book I do not remember buying, that my wife swears she didn't buy, with no name on the cover. I have not opened it. It sits in a drawer in my garage, and I have not opened it, and I am not going to open it. I just know, the way I knew about the pen, that if I did, the writing would start again at the top of a clean page, and it would be a few minutes ahead of me, and it would be patient. And somewhere down the page, in handwriting I'd recognize as my own, it would be waiting to tell me to turn around. Here's something they don't tell you about a building. It's supposed to be smaller on the inside than the outside. Walls take up space. Always. The inside is always a little smaller than what you see from the road. The day you walk into a place and it's bigger on the inside than it has any right to be, is the day you should turn around and walk right back out. And I learned that lesson somewhere I can never go back to, off Interstate 95 in the Georgia Lowcountry. I run a tow truck out of Savannah, mostly the night shift. Mostly the swampy stretches of 95 where cars break down in the dark, with nothing around for miles but cypress and black water and the bugs. You get used to it. You get used to standing on a dark shoulder, hooking up some stranger's dead sedan, while the swamp breathes all around you. Not much spooks a man after 5 years of that. So when dispatch sent me to a closed rest area at 2 in the morning, a stalled car reported in the lot, no answer on the callback number, I didn't think twice. Closed rest areas are good for stalled cars. People pull off to nap, and the batteries die. The rest area had been shut for renovation for months. Barriers across the entrance, the lights off, the building dark behind plywood over the windows. But there was a car in the lot all right. An old Buick, cold, empty, doors unlocked, keys gone. And there was a light on inside the building. One light, deep in the back, past the plywood. A thin yellow line bleeding out from under what should have been a locked and chained door. The door wasn't locked. The chain was lying on the ground, cut clean. And I figured, this is the part I'd take back if I could. I figured the driver had gone inside to find a working bathroom or a phone, or just somewhere out of the bugs, and gotten turned around in a dark, closed building. And I had a big flashlight and 5 years of nerve, so I went in to find them. Inside was a normal rest area lobby. Dark, dusty, mid-renovation, drop cloths, a ladder, the vending machines unplugged and dark. The light was coming from a hallway at the back, so I went down the hallway toward it, calling out, "Hello? Roadside assistance. Anybody in here?" The hallway was longer than it should have been. I noticed that and didn't let myself notice it. It ran back and back, past restroom doors, past a janitor's closet, past more restroom doors. The single yellow light always a little farther ahead, and the lobby behind me getting smaller and dimmer until I turned around once and couldn't see it at all. Just hallway behind me the same as hallway ahead. I tried the doors as I went. The restroom doors, the closet, testing them, because a door to the outside has to be somewhere. A building has a perimeter. That's just physics. Every one I opened gave me another room with no windows, or another stretch of the same hallway, or a supply closet with shelves of cleaning bottles thick with dust. I tried my phone. The screen lit up fine, full battery, and where the time should have been, it just showed a row of dashes, and where the signal should have been, nothing. And the little map, when I opened it, showed me as a blue dot in a gray field with no roads, no labels, no anything. Just my dot, alone, in the middle of nowhere the map had ever heard of. I'm not stupid. I knew by then that the building I was inside of was bigger than the building I'd seen from the lot. I knew it the way you know you've made a serious mistake on a ladder. I stopped calling out. I turned around to go back the way I came, and I walked, and I walked, and the hallway just kept giving me more hallway. And there is no describing what that does to you, to walk back exactly the way you came, and have the world refuse to return you to where you started. I started to jog, then I ran. Restroom door, closet, restroom door. The yellow light somehow always ahead, no matter which way I faced. The carpet the same stained industrial gray. The air gone still and warm, and smelling faintly of the inside of an old air conditioner. And the worst part, I need you to understand this, because it's the part that breaks people. The worst part was that it was empty, and it was enormous, and it was completely silent, except for me. No monster, no footsteps but mine, no breathing, no voice, nothing chasing me. Just rooms, and rooms behind rooms, and more building than the world had room for, going on and on with the patience of a thing that has all the time there is. I would have traded anything for something to be chasing me. Something to run from would have meant there was a way out, somewhere, that the thing wanted to keep me from. This had no exit because it didn't need one. Why would a trap need an exit? I found the other driver. That's the thing I haven't told anybody straight. Far back. I don't know how far. In a side room that was just an empty room with that same gray carpet, there was a man sitting against the wall with his knees up, an older fella, calm, like he'd been there a while. The Buick's owner, had to be. I almost cried with relief. I asked if he was all right, if he knew the way out. He looked up at me, and he wasn't afraid, and that was the most frightening thing of all. He had the calm of a man who'd done all his being afraid a long time ago. And he said, "There isn't one. I've been looking since 2004. You stop looking, after a while. It's quieter if you stop looking." And he asked me, polite, almost hopeful, what year it was on the outside. I didn't answer him. God forgive me. I ran. I left that man sitting against the wall and I ran, because I was not going to stop looking. I was not going to become a calm man asking strangers what year it was. And I ran, and I ran, and I slammed through a door at a dead sprint expecting more hallway. And I fell out onto the cracked asphalt of the lot. In the dark, the bugs screaming, my own truck idling right where I'd left it with the door open and the radio playing. 2 minutes, dispatch said, when I finally got my voice back to call in. I'd been inside about 2 minutes. The Buick was still there. Cold, empty, doors unlocked, keys gone. I gave dispatch the plate. They ran it. The car had been reported abandoned at that rest area before, and the registration came back to a man who'd been listed missing since 2004. The trooper who took my statement at the gas station was patient with me, the way they get with people who've clearly had a bad fright. And when I told him about the man against the wall, he wrote it down without changing his face. But when I got to the part about 2004, he stopped writing. He set his pen down, and he told me, quiet, off the record, that the man whose name came back on that Buick had a daughter who still called the post twice a year, every year, to ask if there was any news, and that he'd been the one to take her calls for the last few years, and that he never knew what to tell her. He asked me, careful, like it cost him, whether the man had seemed like he was suffering. I told him the truth. I told him no. I told him the man seemed calm and at peace, and that I wished to God he hadn't, because a suffering man you can hope to save, but you can't save a man who stopped looking. I quit towing. I drive a delivery route now, daylight only, buildings I know, and I count the doors in any place I enter, and I make sure the inside is smaller than the outside before I let myself relax. The rest area finished its renovation and reopened. It looks lovely. It looks completely normal. I will not stop there. I will hold it for 200 miles before I stop there. Because I know what's behind the plywood and the fresh paint. I know the hallway is still back there, longer than the building, and the yellow light is still on at the end of it. And somewhere down past all those rooms, a calm old man is sitting against a gray wall with his knees up, not afraid anymore, having stopped looking, waiting for the next person who reads a cut chain and a light left on as an invitation. And I think about how I left him there, and I think about how he didn't try to stop me. And I think the reason he didn't try to stop me is that he already knew something I'm only starting to understand. That nobody who runs out of that place runs out for good. That it lets a few of us go, and that letting go is just the long way of keeping you. My name is Elena, and I'm a veterinarian. I've spent 12 years in western Montana with my arms inside animals, setting bones, pulling calves, putting the suffering ones to sleep with a hand on their flank. I tell you my profession because it matters to what happened. I know what's under the skin. I know what a body is supposed to feel like from the inside out. The give of muscle, the slide of tendon, the heat of living tissue. That knowledge is the only reason I understood, faster than most people would have, that the thing happening to the man at the rest area was not a medical emergency. It was something I had no name for, and now it's happening to me. It was late, past midnight, and I was driving home to Kalispell from an emergency call at a ranch 2 valleys over, a horse with a twisted gut that I'd lost, which always leaves me hollow and shaking, no good to drive. So I pulled into a rest area on Highway 2 to get my hands to stop trembling before the mountain road. There was a pickup in the lot with its hazards going, slow orange pulses, and a man sitting on the curb beside it with his head down, and the doctor in me, the same instinct that runs the hospice nurse toward the crying, got out of my car and went to him before the rest of me could weigh whether that was wise. I'd lost the horse maybe 90 minutes before, and I was still in that raw, scraped-out place you go after a death, where your hands won't quite obey, and your judgment is a half-step slow. I've come to think that mattered, the way it mattered for the man on the coast and the woman in the desert. That the thing in these places knows how to find the person whose guard is down. The tired one, the grieving one, the one running on instinct because the careful part of them is exhausted. I was exactly that night, hollow and shaking, and looking for someone to save because I'd just failed to save something else. "Are you hurt?" I asked. "I'm a vet. I have medical training. Can I help?" He looked up at me, and in the orange pulse of his hazards, his face was wrong in a way I couldn't place at first. Slack. Then I saw his eyes. The headlights of a passing truck swept across us, and his eyes caught the light and threw it back, flat, reflective, a dull, mirrored silver, the way a deer's eyes catch your high beams, the way no human eye does. And he said, in a voice that came out level and strange, "Don't touch me. It transfers by touch. I think it transfers by touch." I should have run, but I'm a doctor and he was clearly in crisis, and I crouched down, not touching him, just near, and I asked him what was wrong, and he held up his hand. His fingers wouldn't bend. They were locked, slightly curled, rigid, as if cast in something, and the skin over them had a faint metallic sheen under the lot lights, and when he tried to make a fist, the whole hand moved as a single piece, like a glove with no joints. "It started in Belvedere," he said, 2 nights ago, a rest area. I heard something breathing outside my truck and I rolled the window down to look, and here he laughed, a terrible flat laugh. I rolled the window down, and something touched my wrist, and now I can hear it, under my skin. Listen. I leaned closer, against everything I knew, and I listened. And from under the skin of his forearm, beneath the muscle, where there is nothing that could make such a sound, I heard a faint, scratching static, and under the static, very small and very clear, a thin, digital voice, calm as the announcement in an airport. "Conversion 60%. Target stable. Continue." I want to tell you I helped him. I couldn't. There is nothing in 12 years of medicine that prepares you for a man whose body is being slowly replaced from the inside, who is going still and silver and quiet, who looks at you with mirror eyes and asks you, in a voice that is already half not his own, to please tell his wife in Missoula that he tried to come home. I asked him his name, because that's what you do. You keep them talking. You keep them anchored to themselves. He had to think about it, and that was the worst moment of all, watching a man hesitate over his own name, and then he said it, and then he said, almost wondering, "I can feel it taking that too. The name. It's reading it." I called 911. I stayed with him, not touching, talking, until the static under his skin rose to a hiss, and the digital voice said, "Conversion complete, retrieval imminent." And his eyes, which had been frightened, went calm and flat and final, and he stopped answering me, and he simply sat there on the curb, breathing slow and even, patient, waiting to be retrieved by something I could not see and did not want to. I left before it came. I'm not proud of that. I got in my car and I drove home to Kalispell with the heater roaring, and somewhere on the mountain road I noticed my wrist itched, the wrist I'd held out, once, to steady myself on the curb beside him, the curb he'd been sitting on, the concrete his locked silver hand had been resting on a moment before. I scrubbed that wrist raw when I got home. I scrubbed it with surgical soap and then with bleach until the skin went red and angry, the way I scrub before surgery, the way I scrub when I've had my hands somewhere they shouldn't have been. I told myself the itch was the bleach. I told myself the chill was just the long night and the lost horse and the adrenaline draining out. I am very good at telling myself the medical, reasonable thing. I have to be, in my work. The reasonable thing is almost always true. It transfers by touch. He told me. I think it transfers by touch. I'm sitting in my own kitchen now. The sun is coming up over the flatheads, the same mountains I've watched come up 1,000 times. And the house is cold, and I can't get it warm. I haven't gone to the hospital. I can't. Because when I look in the mirror over the sink, my eyes aren't brown anymore. There's a silver coming up in them, from behind, like a coin surfacing in dark water, and my fingers are getting stiff. And an hour ago, when the house was very quiet, I held my own forearm up to my ear, because I'm a doctor and I had to know. I heard it, faint, under the skin, static, and a thin, calm voice. Conversion 14%, target stable. Continue. I've done the math the way I'd do it for a patient. The man on the curb said his started in Belvedere 2 nights before I met him. And when I found him, he was at 60% and failing fast. So call it roughly 2 days from touch to conversion complete. Mine started when I steadied myself on that curb. I'm at 14% now, and the sun is only just coming up on the first morning. By a vet's arithmetic, that gives me until sometime tomorrow night before the voice under my skin says the word complete, and my eyes go the rest of the way to silver, and something I can't see comes to retrieve what's left. I don't know how long I have. A night, 2. I'm telling you this while I still have my own voice to tell it in. And I'm telling it to you, Mr. Darkveil, and to everyone listening, because the man on the curb couldn't warn anyone. It took him before he could, and I won't make that same mistake. Somebody has to know. Somebody has to be warned. So this is the warning, and the question I'll leave you with. The last clear thing I can give you before the static gets too loud to think over. If you stop at a rest area tonight, anywhere, and you see someone sitting alone in the dark who seems to be in trouble, and every good instinct you have, the kind that runs you toward the crying, the kind that makes you a decent person, tells you to go to them and help, would you still go? Knowing what I know now, I don't have an answer. I went. I was the kind of person who goes, and I'd give anything to take it back, and I'd probably go again, because that's who I am, and that, I think, is the cruelest part of all of it. Tell me in the comments below what you would do, and then please, go check that your doors are locked and your windows are up, and that the only voice in your house tonight is your own. I'd like to tell you that we tracked Elena down, that she got to a hospital, that there's a happy ending, that the silver in her eyes turned out to be exhaustion and fear and a trick of the bathroom light. We don't know. The recording she sent us ends where you heard it end. The email address it came from no longer accepts replies. The horse, the ranch, the lost call, all of it checks out. Elena was real, and she was a veterinarian in the Flathead Valley, and after a certain date there is simply no more record of her at all. So, that's where I'll leave you tonight. 10 stops along the dark arteries of this country. A trucker who learned not to roll down his window. A nurse who couldn't save a child who'd been dead for 50 years. A grandmother who refused to remain stationary. A man who left another man sitting calm against a gray wall, and has not slept right since. I won't ask which one frightened you the most, because I've come to think that's the wrong question. The right question is the one almost all of them kept circling back to, whether it was a breathing thing, or a calm recorded voice, or the slow pull of the ocean. Every one of these places found a person whose guard was down, tired, grieving, alone, running on the good instinct that makes us go toward the crying, and it used that goodness as the door. So here is the only protection I know how to offer. When you stop tonight, and you will stop, we all stop, be the careful animal. Lock the doors, keep the windows up. Don't go toward the voice, even if it knows your name, especially if it knows your name. If you have your own account of something that found you in one of these quiet places off the road, the email is in the description, and your story may be the one that warns the next person in time. Until then, this has been Mr. Darkveil. Subscribe, ring the bell, and stay with me a while longer, the next time the night feels too long to drive alone. And remember, the rest area is built to be a refuge, but a refuge and a trap are the same shape from the outside. It's only once you've stopped and shut off the engine and let the quiet in that you find out which one you pulled into. Good night, travelers. Keep your eyes on the road.